It is now my honor to introduce Kathleen Wheaton. She is the president and managing editor of the Washington Publishing House, and she is going to introduce our two authors.
Hi, thank you once again to Politics and Prose for supporting our 2020 book launch. As Tom said, I am the president and managing editor of Washington Writers Publishing House. It's a 47-year-old cooperative press that since 1975 has published more than 120 books of poetry and fiction. We have an annual contest, manuscript contest, which is open to poets and writers who live within 75 miles of DC. And the winners of both the poetry manuscript contest and the fiction manuscript contest have their books published, and they then become part of the cooperative. So it's a great honor and pleasure to introduce to you our two newest members, poet Stephen Leyva and writer Adam Schwartz. So we'll start out with listening to Stephen read from his book, The Understudy's Handbook. Stephen was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, and grew up in Houston, Texas, and now lives in Baltimore. His poems have appeared or are forthcoming in Two Bridges Review, Scalawag, Nashville Review, Jubilat, Vinyl, Prairie Schooner, and Best American Poetry 2020. He's a Cave Canem Fellow and author of the chapbook Low Parish. Leyva has an MFA from the University of Baltimore, where he's an assistant professor in the Klein Family School of Communications Design. And so here, it is my honor to turn this over to Stephen. Stephen.
Hi, everybody. Hope you can hear me well. It's such an honor to be here. I'm so thankful to Washington Writers Publishing House for selecting the Understudy's Handbook. And I just want to say, thank you to my partner, Casey Leyva, and my children who have supported me through this. And I'm just going to get to the poems. This book is dedicated to my brother, Rabu Leyva. Primer. There is no New Orleans, only the pauses between parades. The city christens its own, each palm leaf brushing our esplanade, a wet aspergillum. You will be known here as a gargoyle knows each inch of stone it sleeps in, but cannot wipe its tears. What has all this iron wrought? Our family intoning Zydeco means the accordion's broken back, means another fiddle's whip over catgut, means there is a balcony for everyone to die on. What is French about these quarters is exile. All gardens to the backyard. Son, remember to tell your sons, whatever whispers in the weary ear, endlessly, come here, taste and taste, is an inability to sustain innocence. No, not quite. Something like feathers plucked from a mask. So that's the opening poem and the Understudy's Handbook. There's a lot of New Orleans in here where I was born, and I love that Black city. I love its enduring magic. I'm gonna read two sonnets back to back. One of them is called Sonnet for the Side-Eye. The storm is unimpressed with moans, your lack of music. Can you match her tambourine of rain, Hail her baritone sax called Cat 5, her horn mute of cumulonimbus seen for days, silencing the sun. The storm doesn't bat an eye if your name is New Orleans or Houston or Heaven or Play Cousin. You're going to get this blue by any means suitable to sweet, sweet Creole Kate. Shrew, untamed, for sure, she treats you like a trade. Say her name, then forget who's asked. No one's listening. Call a spade, and a storm. How utterly human, true, this envy of Maelstrom to be like you. And the second sonnet, unmasking the chorus. July doesn't beg. The cicadas are coughing through their timbrels and couldn't care less whether anyone dreams of wings. Acquire a husk, they hum, like a cigarette hums, alone in an ashtray. Tree. I sound that stretches like the skin of a snare drum. Dunce. Abandon has its own bandwagon, and the confederacy of late summer's heat can't assuage. Boredom. The horizon sighs like a churchwarden pipe. I could die on this tree, the cicadas sing, coughing themselves, rare and blue, like a husk of song, the lyrics, but not the tune. All right, there's a poem that I read every time that I do a reading from the Understudy's Handbook. And the book really tries to think about the ways in which we're prepared for certain roles in society and then not allowed to play them. The way that our identities intersect with one another and what it makes of us, what history makes of us. Do we ultimately, in language, become understudies to our own identities? But here's a poem I wrote at the Vermont Studio Center on a residency there called Supremacy. And it's really built on metaphor. If anyone's played badminton, you'll catch the metaphor. Supremacy. Consider the shuttlecock, its deft lightness, its rubber nose unbent, its attention to racket, its fear of the ground, its willingness to lob or smash, its whiteness, its penchant for being held afloat by the slightest breeze and histories of swing, how it needs to be batted between two players, how it recognizes their want. Consider its feathers, its plastic, its conical shape suggesting hierarchy, and always its weight in your hand, how it seeks to be served. So there's quite a bit of what I might call like nerdy poems in here, and so I'm going to read a poem that is like straight out of my childhood. So I watched a lot of Star Trek: The Next Generation with my mother as a child, and one of the things I realized as an adult is one of the reasons we were watching so much Star Trek: The Next Generation is because Patrick Stewart, who plays the captain on Star Trek Patrick Stewart was the only white man that my mother was ever like, damn fine. And so over time, I kept trying to write this poem to Patrick Stewart, who is one of my favorite actors, and my mom insisted on being in the poem. So here is Ode to Patrick Stewart, snatched by Mama. Playing captain on TNG, you brought sexy back to balding. Or so my mother said, half smacking her lips on Jean-Luc. Easy on brown eyes that never loved white men before. All those roles in the RSC prep to sit on the set. Roddenberry enthroned, leathered in late 80s tan. Among your stage credits, nobility caught in a photo-negative stage production, Othello. Gray temples fully shaved, blackface rubbed out the imaginary cast list, dark love calling back the days where you lived in my living room TV. making mulattoes in my mother's mind, her Desdemona fantasy. And true, she doesn't even know that name, but could pull it off, pull down the world's stage, or at least undress taboos, having bowed before in one Minnesota courthouse near Mankato State, newly pregnant, newly married. With you, she could do this as quickly as she has taken over this ode. Sir Patrick Stewart, the one of my memory, way back when two TVs could stack on each other, alternative shelves. You were loved, not wisely, but too well. Here's another ode. Here's another ode to pop culture. This is Ode to Lando Calrissian. And shout out to Tim Siebels, who gave me some great edits on this poem. Ode to Lando Calrissian. If you were stunting in a galaxy far, far away, blue cape, suave, with a gold lining that would shame the sun, with a cool walk and a gambler hustle, if you had a hairstyle so fresh, you'd claim to have won it off an out-of-work Cloud City cosmetologist, if even your eyebrows had scoundrel in their arch, if everybody knew the music bumped cargo hold to cockpit in the Millennium Falcon, a name straight out of P-Funk, if everyone could see those hands charting the dark dreams of stars into the buttermilk of a hip brother running his own city, if we asked, where are all the Black people in the galaxy? Would you help us? Would you bet on us? All right. I really appreciate you all for hanging with me and listening to these poems. I'm going to read a love poem for my partner. The Inner Harbor's Octave, for C. The only incorruptible sight here is the green of the camphor tree, its rhizomes in your iris, extracting an oil. Scent on the wind raises a Lazarus kiss we shared one harborside afternoon. The algae blooms hidden for once below the water's skin of sunlight. The pig iron colonial cannons all face away. The horizon, unable to show any embarrassment, blushes hours after we've left the hill, left it verdant and clinging to the gossip of cicadas. Green is the color of cleaving. It has wrestled Eros from red. There's a section in the poem at the end of the book called Leaving the Panopticon. And the Panopticon is like a circular prison. And a lot of the poems were inspired by looking at and imagining being at the Baltimore Museum of Art. So I want to read a poem called The Dark Room. The Dark Room. Alone at the coat check, handing over the family's London fogs and North Faces, I say enough. Calipers can't unscrew enough to measure my son's naked smile when I ask about Sumaya, the darkest child in his class. He is only 6, but turns his face from mine to smile wider. It's not what you think. A guilt lingers on my eyelashes. He's only 6, and he's already been told he's not Black. This vice unscrews like calipers until the tips touch me an ochre, a bone still dressed in gristle, and him an ambrotype before the flash, the exposed, opaque parts relatively light. Am I a fool to think that smile my son can't show means he already loves what it took me years to love? I wish for a mirror. Would it be enough if his pleasure could hold like basilium resin? If he could learn early which hands come to develop photographs of their own horrors, and which come to wade in the waters of a dark room with tenderness. And how the sun shudders so slow, whatever moves in us is blurred. I'm going to return to New Orleans a little bit here. There are a couple of poems in here that are called Creolite, and this is a kind of idea from Glissant, the Caribbean theorist and poet, and they're always sort of concerned with the idea of synthesis in language. Here is Creolite 1. Mist on the marshlands of the tongue. Here we say stow and flow rhyme. Contrarians, born into the family of auto-antonyms, we cleave any countersign, any accent, bolt to the speak-easy door. Do you belong? Candor. Born in a basket of idiom, go down Moses, cleave the sea. That first taught us neither its great hexameters nor its plain I ams, low tide, low parish, low chariot, swing and swing. Carry us, lightning. Help us to conjure another homeland. The most specific pain of exile is boredom. Heavy as the humidity, which always hangs like a carcass of wind in Louisiana. The earth inside your skull, America across your face, the South chapping your lips, mist on the marshlands of the tongue. I'm going to read the last poem in the first section. The first section of the book is called Inside the Mouth of a Trumpet. And there are two epigraphs, before I read this last poem in that section, there are two epigraphs that I want to share with you for that section. And the epigraphs for the section say, one is from Wallace Stevens. It says, it has to be living to learn the speech of the place. And that's from his poem, Modern Poetry. And then there's a second epigraph from Paul Robeson. It is not a question of who is the strongest, but what form of life is the strongest, from an essay called The New Idealism. Here is a poem called Ars Poetica with Zydeco. It has it has a quote from John Kennedy Toole from the Confederacy of Dunces. Leaving New Orleans also frightened me considerably. Ars Poetica with Zydeco. What the sea laments is return, self to self, a tenderness. Nobody dies here because no one goes in the ground. We are not made wafers for the mud's immeasurable tongues. Communion, rather, is how I place my brown mouth on another brown mouth, not kiss, rather accent, this too, a reaching sea returning to lament. 2. The dead must rest above ground, or every last rite would be a sea burial. Our French broken. The Gulf has always been a great pallbearer. We imbibe silence in white surf, spit libation, lick, beg this Creole, walk water, raise dead, speak storm. Then remember our mouths were made empty mausoleums. Even this Mississippi ends in toothless grin. Oh, what spirits are willing, come. Quick, quick, slow, our tender meter rises as tide on the edge of a tongue, making each bent utterance baptism. 3. The poet says, a sea of grief is not a proscenium. I watch a pelican dive for 2 fish, hidden in the worn buoy's shadow. Who can tell which lived its miracle to multiply and which slid down the pelican's gullet? If not a stage, then what, poet? I've exhausted the names for God's mirror. Let me had been. I can only repeat myself Amen, amen, amen. So I wanted to be wrapping up here. I'm going to read a poem, the poem that was chosen for Best American Poetry 2020, and big, huge, enduring thank you to Paisley Rechdell, who selected this poem, and thank you to Jubilat, who printed it, who selected it originally for publication. But it's a poem. It's a poem about a middle school dance. So if you can imagine that awkwardness and that desire coming together, it'll put you in the right place. When I feel a whoop coming on, for the feast of Whitsuntide and after-school dances. Ain't the butterfly, it's the Tootsie Roll that the speakers pose as a polemic against your narrow hips. This circles musk, classmates grinding like black pepper in a cheap mill, uneven, coarse. Shamelessly, you practice outside the arc of polo shirts and crop tops and starchy jeans sharp enough to cut penumbras from 8th graders. Summon an adolescent faith to push past the girl who laid her tongue in your mouth like a lisp on a field trip to the zoo right in front of the rhino exhibit. Your lonely Afro-Latino blood bids the center of hype, ooh, and funk to be filled with your inheritance. Flat feet, a skinny boy's sense of rhythm, and a soft uptown fade. Go, boy, go, you've only heard in church. This dance is different than the Holy Ghost shout, filling half an hour on Sunday. Nothing like the body rock of your father's bachata he'd pull out to prove men with flat asses could dance. Still, you press and press, throw your knees like bolos, catch up to the DJ's scratch in time for the song to switch choruses. Boys to men, don't wait till the water runs dry. Those violins still weep for the awkward slow drags you'll soon try. And there's a 2-second panoply where you've imitated the other boys in their non-butterfly and their roll toot sweet. There, at least, a hip moment of locomotion where no one could charge you with a lack of blackness. To the left, to the right, more flame than Pentecost. Eyes like 2 upper rooms, wholly ghosted, your body becoming a tongue spoken. All right, I'm just going to read one more poem. This is the last poem. It's the last poem in the book. There are 3 poems in here. There are 3 poems in here that are called Anti-Confessional, and this is the last of them. This is Anti-Confessional 3. This isn't a secret. I have failed to love with the patience of hibiscus root, whose buds bloom with no thought of being tea. I have not loved my innocence, overdressed in morning light. How can the earth keep turning to the thing that will kill it? Oh, sun, bring me a warm hill in August, an echo of a fragile and immortal green, a better remembrance of my grandma's eyes. I have failed to forget love is one of many higher choruses. And yes, there are octaves of light that linger. Can we still call love love anymore? Or have we avoided failure? Every ode must fail if there is to be a higher love. Thank you all so much. I hope you'll support Washington Writers Publishing House and support the book as well. I hope these poems sing for you. And I just want to say how much of a pleasure it is to be on this journey, on this book that took 7 years. I'm just so thankful. And I couldn't have asked for more, a more welcoming and more pleasurable experience than it's been being in the Washington Writers Publishing House family. Y'all are gonna love Adam's work, so I'm gonna pass the torch to him.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was really just an amazing reading. And to do it into the silence, it was really impressive. So thanks so much. So now we will turn to our fiction winner, Adam Schwartz, whose short story collection, The Rest of the World, is the 2020 fiction prize winner. His Adam stories have won prizes sponsored by Poets and Writers, Philadelphia Stories, and Baltimore City Paper. And they've also appeared in Mississippi Review, December Magazine, Little Patuxent Review, Arkansas Review, and other literary journals. He has stories forthcoming in Raritan, Popshot, and Gargoyle. And his nonfiction has appeared in the Baltimore Sun and the New York Daily News, Sewanee Review, and Bethesda Magazine. Adam earned an MFA from Washington University in St. Louis, and for 22 years, he has taught high school in Baltimore, where many of these stories are set. So here is Adam Schwartz.
Thank you, Stephen, and thank you, Kathleen, for the introduction. It's a great honor to be here reading, and I'm grateful to the Washington Writers Publishing House for all the support for bringing my book to press and helping me get it together. It's been a wonderful ride so far. So my favorite stories when I'm reading, my favorite stories are stories that have powerful literary effects, but also where something happens. And the writers I love to read, Ron Rash, Richard Ford, Frank O'Connor, John Eggert Weidman, Eudora Welty, and many others sometimes offer stories like that. So I'm going to read the first 4 short scenes from the opening story in my collection, and something does happen. The title of the story is Pavane for a Dead Princess. Well, I think of that time before everything got crazy, and I see Missy Ha like she was then, 19 with a heart-shaped face, teeth like fine china, and a little girl's giggle for something she knew that you didn't. Other girls tried so hard to make themselves look cute. Missy was pretty just because. And in that smile that stayed in her eyes, you thought you might see something better in yourself. They were Koreans, her family, with a carryout up the hill. You'd see their neon walk, throwing off samurai blades of sunshine, blinking at the words, Democratic best, before you even got there. The Ha's, most of them anyway, lived in the neighborhood, either above the store or next door. When you stepped up to order your food, the Ha's weren't hiding behind some plexiglass cocoon, buzzing their own in and out. They took your order like real people, face to face, talking about whatever. The sewer grate at the curb, puffing rotten eggs again, or how nobody's giving Obama a chance, or that crazy 2012 movie that had some people so shook you couldn't tell them it was made up. Summers, the Ha's hosed off their front sidewalks and eased hustlers off their corners and chilled outside on the sidewalk, reading Korean newspapers, oohing and ahhing over someone's new baby, and always tidying their roses. The Ha's did a lot for those roses, gave them bone meal and lime, spritz from a mister, nailed little wooden slats into the brick to help them climb, and then talked those vines halfway up the front of the house. Every June, they hosted a block party where they cooked out for the whole neighborhood, hamburgers, hot dogs, lemons stuck through with peppermint sticks, and even short ribs if you went early enough. You'd smell the charcoal meat for blocks, and you knew it was summer. In the fall, Sundays especially, they represented in purple Ravens jerseys, just like a lot of people. The one they call Unc with the spiky hair might even cross the street and take a rip of whatever was going around, Henny or Grey Goose, and then lose a few dollars playing spades in his checkered trim chef shirt. Everyone liked the Ha's. They were good people, like I said, real people. But none of what I told here meant they wanted Missy mixing with the customers. And that's what I was, a customer. Regular enough, they even called me by my favorite order, number 5 for the spicy yakime. Everything changed after Maha caught Missy showing me her book of drawings. We were low on the back steps and the big spiral lay in my lap. She kept reaching across my side to flip the pages, embarrassed for me to look too hard. My heart jumped each time she pressed against me, snug. Missy's drawings were wild. They were on thick paper, some in rubbed charcoal, others she painted freehand in peaches and grays that had crinkled the edges. Lines might be twined thin or much bolder. The people in them were open leather vests, mesh garters, push-ups, bustiers. A couple of chicks even had their titties out. Jealousy's a nasty feeling, starts eating you up even when it's got no call. And I could feel my face getting hot because you wouldn't think Missy was that kind of girl. She saw my pinched eyes and flipped the page, but the next page was just as crowded with other half-naked people. I took off my baseball cap and stroked my hair forward. What kind of parties you been going to? I asked. She cringed, scrunching up her shoulders, and then palmed back a giggle. Something funny? I asked. All the smothered laughter just went into her eyes. I was about to say something really crude. Whatever. She rocked forward, caught herself, and came up laughing. They're not real, Bahia. I rapped a knuckle on the page. They must have come from somewhere, I said. Relax, she said, her smile fading. They're only in my head. The kitchen fan was softly venting out, its blades a ghosty whirl of sooty vinegar blowing through the alley. Don't you believe me? She asked. They don't look like nobody's strangers to me, I said. And I started redoing the laces on my tennis. They look real, like true blue people. No, sweetie. She slipped a gentle hand behind my neck. It's art. Art? I said. Yes, she said. Made up. Oh, I said, unsure if this made it better. Then turning the page, I realized there was something off in the way she'd drawn these people, some faraway look in their faces, like how mannequins got their feelings missing. But these kind of dirty, aren't they? I asked. Like obscene, she said. Like someone might think you easy peasy, I said. She dropped her eyes and looked away. Just because I stay inside doesn't mean I'm boring, she said. I turned another page, starting to feel dumb for getting heated. Why do you draw this stuff anyway? I asked. She did not answer right away. I shouldn't have brought them out here, she said. We were quiet, and it's hard to explain because it's been a while now, but I still wonder about those pictures and the sad feeling they gave off and what those lost oval faces were looking for. Then Maha stepped out, cracked an old mop handle against the iron railing, and called sharply in Korean. I felt then like she'd been watching us. Missy yanked away the spiral, slammed it shut, and popped up. Clanging up those metal stairs to go inside, Missy's legs sounded heavy and her head was down, and Maha was just standing there giving me the stink eye. Like Missy, Maha had been pretty once too. You could tell. But now Maha's cheeks drooped and her dark eyes rested in little bowls of purple. You got the feeling she was mad at Missy for rocking what she'd lost. Well, after that, whenever I came around, something caught in Maha's face as soon as she saw me, and I just knew she was downing me inside her head. I'd be thinking, is you looking at me sideways, or is that just your pan face? Whatever it was, Maha made sure to shoo Missy away to sweep up the back, or grumbled for more ice, and Maha, or maybe Unc, would finish my order like they were trying to hurt someone before hurrying me out. Sometimes the food wasn't even cooked right. 2 days before everything got crazy, we sat on a low stone wall at the playground. I'd swung past Democratic Best after work. We had set it up so that when we could, Missy would follow me down there after I got my order. At the jungle gym, little kids played at monkey bars or sat pretzel style, counting off some clapping game. Took you long enough, I said. She lit a cigarette and took a long pull. I had to wait for my mom to go next door, she said. Why'd they like that? I opened my styrofoam tray of food. I don't usually talk to boys around here, she said. So? I asked. They don't want me to make a mistake, she said. Who they want you to talk to? I asked. She punched out a short, disgusted breath. A Korean realtor? My eyes rested on her mouth where her top lip was bell-shaped. Her hair, inky and shiny, was swept up in a bun, stuck through with 2 orange pencils. Little wisps hung down, and every so often she'd brush them back from her cheeks. Missy hadn't gone to a zone school, Patterson or Lake, like everyone else around there. Her parents had paid for one of those private schools where the girls wore plaid skirts and rode a cheese bus that came right to their house. In the afternoon, her father used to be at the curb, ready to chaperone Missy those 20 feet to the door. So I guess they're not giving me no chance? I asked. Probably not, she said, and bumped her shoulder against mine. You are not Korean or a realtor. I wheeled my fork in slow turns through the fried rice and then closed the container for later. I don't like to eat mad. It sits on my stomach wrong. Well, I said, it's not like I'm one of these hoodlums that's always cussing or feels some need to act out. I said, and I plucked up the front of my zebra work shirt. I keep a job. I even watch the History Channel. Missy wagged a finger, imitating her mother. Rose, not like fungus, make a problem, she said. Yeah, what'd she say about keeping you back there in a dirty apron, chopping onion all day? I asked. She shrugged and passed me a small white paper bag she'd smuggled out. It was a cookie, pebbled with chocolate chips. I set it with the other food. You're too pretty to be in an apron anyway, I said. She doesn't think like that, Missy said. Other girls I talked to, I held back compliments because it got their heads too big, and then they'd want the world. But Missy, she wasn't like that. She oughta, I said, because one day someone's gonna put you on a magazine. She dropped her eyes and smiled shyly. What? I said, that's what they do with pretty girls like you. We were quiet, and I sipped my half and half. You'd have to know my parents to understand, she said. Don't I? I asked. I've been eating their food half my life. That's the store, she said. Home, inside, is different. I'm gonna take a sip of water. The Haas were so far up Missy's business, she had to cook up some wild lies before they'd let her out to the movies with me. That I didn't like girls, that I tutored kids at the Chum Bucket, that I stayed in church Sundays, that I'd be starting college for accounting soon, that we'd be meeting old friends of hers from school at the theater. About noon that day, I got on the phone with Missy to hook everything up. Fajitas at the Can downtown, and then to that new Transformers movie. Popcorn, Sprites, those little jujubes I know she likes. Soon as we hung up, I started cleaning. A girl like Missy would expect a sanitary toilet if we came back to my place after. And I was so amped up that in between sweeping and scrubbing, I knocked out fat sets of push-ups and crunches. That night, I made sure I was looking fresh, proper like too. When I got to Missy's, I had on a sky blue polo button down, flat front cream khakis looped with a shiny black belt, and gray Pumas right from the box. I also thought that maybe some of the fellows around the way would see us crossing the park, and pretty as Missy was, I liked the idea of that. Missy had told me to wait out front. She'd be looking for me. I'd been out there less than a minute when a dude came bopping up the block. When he got close, he stopped, snapped his fingers, and said, "Say, ain't I seeing you at Foot Locker?" I couldn't place his face, but I didn't think anything of it. Told him, yeah. Bet, he said, happy for nothing. I knew you. I was quiet. You working this weekend? So I'm trying to get that employee discount, he said. Nah, brah, I said, can't do that. Ain't those new Jordans about to drop? He asked. Saturday, I said, they're gonna be tight. What, baby blue and silver, he asked. Blue and silver or red and black, take your pick, I said. So what's up, he asked. I wish I could help you out. I cut a glance up at Missy's windows. Dude got a real attitude. That's petty, man, he said. Hey, I'll never make manager giving away the hot flavors, I said. I bet you don't tell your peoples that when they come up there, he said. My peoples don't come up there, I said, and if they did, it wouldn't be with their hands out. He squared himself, close enough now that on his stone face I could smell the sour meddy he'd been smoking. You a damn lie, he said, and I didn't ask you all that. In a minute, Missy would be stepping out looking amazing, probably wearing those skinny jeans and white halter, and we'd be on our way to those good steak fajitas, and this dude wouldn't have no one to jaw at and would have just bounced. But looking in dude's eyes, I could see that this stone face wasn't going nowhere. I might look funny, might have a funny name, but I can handle myself. People used to say I favor Vin Diesel, and I guess I do a little, except my eyes are like two full moons, and my people are all from another side of the world. A father in Brazil and a Canadian mother, one of those white girls that used to lock down her hair in cornrows so tight you knew she was wacky bats. If I grew out my hair, you'd see these countries in me. Plus, I'd rather listen to Wyclef or Santana or even Adele than any of these phony gangsters on 92Q rapping about how they're the realest cat they know. Call me what you want. I'm a green-eyed, red-bone bull. Do I know you, bruh? I asked. In my head, I was trying to figure out how I can do this and keep my clothes clean. So when I hit him, I was punching a hole in the sky to square this whole thing up front. But that's not how it went. He was quick, and I barely caught him. And when he swung, there was a corkscrew squeezed into his fist, which he socked through my cheek, piston quick. I knew at once he'd hurt me because I felt that metal on my tongue. Then I was like, if I'm going to Johns Hopkins, he's going to Johns Hopkins. Fast. It was all happening so fast. But I stayed cool and got in close. We were tussling in the Haas rose bushes, and then he was under me, and I knew I had him, and that he would have to deal with how I dug up in him. Thorns like barbed wire raked hell out of my neck and arms, but I did not feel them till later. When Missy came out and saw me and Dude in the roses, both of us messed up. She started screaming, no, 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 kind of fanning her hands like a bird too hurt to fly. I felt her tugging on my belt, trying to pull me up, and I let her. I don't remember climbing those steps, but inside the Haas house, I worried Dude would be getting up and following us in. So I put my shoulder into that door and turned the lock myself. With my back pressed against the jamb, I stood sucking air. The house smelled like cooked cabbage and lemon pledge. I guess I looked bad because when Missy turned and saw me, really saw me, she hid her face in her hands. Down the hole she yanked me. On the bright hardwood floors, my face trailed red pennies. A lacquered table with little ivory turtles and a brass dragon swam at me. The Haas home, I realized, was different from other houses nearby, or even their dingy carryout next door. She turned me into a bathroom, and I felt my face being guided into running water. The white sink bowl went whiny dark. I peeked up and noticed then that she'd gotten her hair done. It was straight and shiny with gold highlights, parted on the side under a butterfly beret, and she was wearing this candy cane mini skirt and platform sandals, and her long legs, olive and smooth, looked so primo, I could have died right there. In the mirror, she was biting her lower lip to quit from crying. A wave of hurt worse than my mouth ran through me. I dunked my face under the faucet and rinsed out grainy bits of broken tooth. I checked the mirror again, and I saw a Halloween mask staring back. My good clothes were soaked through, destroyed. Blood pooled under my tongue. I had to work from swallowing it. I spat and sucked more tap and swished it around, and it was then that I realized that I was steady losing sink water straight out my cheek. This fool had really gone and messed me up. I swore and spat again. Blinking away some drops, I turned to Missy. You look amazing, I told her. But it wasn't Missy anymore, standing in the doorway. It was Maha, her mouth cranked open like a stuck Pez dispenser. She was locked in on something near my shirt collar. She swallowed a wounded grunt, oh, that was full of pain and humiliation. Slowly, she reached and picked something off my shoulder. Her face froze as she held it up to the light, a crinkled white rose petal, all oily with blood. Out of Maha's crumpled face came a shriek, more animal than woman. None of it was English, but it was still annoying. I waved her away and tugged the bathroom door closed because I like a little privacy when I'm watching sink water spout from my cheek like one of those lawn statues you see outside Home Depot. The next time the door opened, it was the police. Thank you.
Well, what a great job, guys. What incredible readings from the both of you. As I said before, you can purchase both of their books from Politics and Prose. There's links in the chat. We do have a few questions, two for Stephen. So if you have any other questions, please type them into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So I'll go with the first one. He says, you made an interesting, profound statement before your reading about being allowed to train for something, but not allowed to play that role. May you elaborate on this?
Sure. You all can hear me fine. I think there are many ways in which this happens. For someone like me, who the majority of my adolescence was in the 90s, when you are constantly being told from folks, whether they were straining credulity or not, that they don't see color, that there's a kind of meritocracy that you must adhere to, that education will save you and pull you up out of poverty, that everything will be okay as long as you go to college. You're constantly getting this message toward your identity, only to be confronted with being pulled over by the police, no matter how much your education is, you know? So I think there are many, many ways in which the society, particularly like American society, likes to tell particular narratives about itself, but is so full of hierarchy, so full of strata, that some people don't realize that they're made into and prepared for roles that society will not yield to them. So that's one way, right? It's just that it's essentially, right, the legacy of white supremacy and the legacy of racism in our country does this to us. But it also, the other way in which I think it happens is within language itself. That if you've ever had that experience of not knowing what to call yourself, you know, so my mother is African American, my dad is Latino from Honduras. I usually identify as Afro-Latino and Black. But I think many people who have a mix of identities, who are trying to synthesize what that means, I think, you know, many queer theorists are so far ahead of us on these kinds of ideas. But that troubling of what do you call yourself? You know, what do we call a thing? What do we call a person? And in the sort of lacuna of an answer, when you don't have an answer, you realize that language itself makes you an understudy, because how can something be known if it can't be called something? You know, so those are some of the ideas that I was thinking about writ large. But you know, to answer that question specifically, that's what I was thinking.
Okay, this question is for Adam. This questioner says that she is also a high school English teacher, and she's wondering how you have time to write. Can you talk about the process you went through to get published?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's definitely tough. It's hard to get to it. I have little tricks for trying to keep my work, my stories in front of me. Many of my colleagues know that they can often find me in the school parking lot during lunch, where I sometimes hide with a printout of, you know, a draft of one of my stories, and I kind of check in with it there, think about it, try and keep it in front of me. When I'm working on a story, I will read the scenes into my phone. record it into my phone and listen to it in the car on the way to work. It's another way to sort of keep the work in front of me. But yeah, it's definitely challenging. I can't tell you how many times I've had the experience where I had a very productive weekend writing and felt good and excited about my work and was eager to stick with it and planned to get to it during the week on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday, et cetera, and didn't really. And then suddenly it's Saturday again, and I haven't had that much time to even really think of it. So it's hard.
Stephen, this question says, two of your frames of reference are New Orleans and Baltimore. The first city is drenched in music and glamour. The second is known for urban decay and crime shows on TV. How do you write poems in the first instance when so much magic is already there? How in the second instance when the magic is so often drowned out by police sirens? P.S. They say they love Baltimore.
Yeah, I think this is a question from a dear friend. One way is to realize the relationship between those two cities, right? So there's this epigraph in the beginning of Confederacy of Dunces that says that all port towns have more in common with each other than they do with any towns inland, right? And some of that has to do, I think, not to give you an overly like professorial answer, but it has to do with port towns being places in which things are in transition. And so language is in transition. Think like lingua franca, that trade language idea. And so with that sort of dynamic of things always coming and going, and with the dynamic of New Orleans and Baltimore both being majority Black cities, it was easy for me. It was the way that I entered into that process of writing about them was to try to synthesize what kinds of things endure between them, and some of it is idiom. Some of it is the way that this is so wonky, but some of it is just the way that vowels are done, right? I don't want to imitate a Maryland accent here, but there's a bending, a kind of insistence on the way that vowels are rendered that I find also happens in a different way around the vowel in New Orleans. So some of it was just focusing on, there's this thing in the language, this music that allowed me to access them. But Baltimore is hard scrabble, unpretentious. What does John Waters say? He says the difference between Baltimore and New York is that everybody thinks they're strange in New York, but they're actually quite normal, and everybody in Baltimore thinks they're normal, but they're actually quite strange. So it's I think what allowed me to write about the kind of music and the things that are in Baltimore had to do with recognizing how easily it will adopt anybody. It will adopt anyone, but it will also remind you that you are adopted. And I think for New Orleans, I tried to focus on not that which is overly performative, recognizing that New Orleans is kind of fetishized in the American consciousness, right? But I tried to approach it with that kind of Creolite idea that it's a place in which many things synthesize, and what might be made of myself if I allow, place and person to become metaphor for one another. It's not a new idea, but that's how I tried to approach it.
We really have time for about one more question, and I'm going to combine a few questions for Adam. A lot of people were wondering about your students, specifically if any of your students have inspired your writing, and if you have based any of your characters on students that you've had.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So here's how I sort of see this. So picture a neighborhood in Baltimore that's been historically redlined, that's been disinvested in, denied resources, both public and private, that's been municipally neglected, that's been subjected to the policies of mass incarceration for decades, that has few job opportunities, that the local media exploits for the purpose of enticing viewers with lurid crime coverage. Now think of the families in this community and the homes full of love. and think of how they are trying to hold it together in the midst of these deep, entrenched, systemic, structural inequities. And lastly, think of the children. Think of the kids that have to figure this shit out, that have to make sense of this, that have to somehow navigate this minefield of complex choices to find a way forward in a city that doesn't always afford them good paths. So when I think of, why kids in Baltimore are the subject of my fiction, why they inspire me to write stories, I see it that way. You don't have to be a school teacher, you don't have to be a writer to be inspired by students, or to be inspired by teenagers, young people, striving for something better, striving against this array of obstacles, and doing it with a lot of determination and without giving into despair. That's inspiring to me just as a human being. And I'm a writer, so I end up, writing stories about them.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you to Adam and Stephen for your time and for sharing your work with us. And congratulations again on your awards. And we want to thank the Washington Writers Publishing House. And we'd like to also thank Kathleen Wheaton for her incredible introduction. And thanks to everyone for your questions and for your comments. This has been a really a great hour of fiction and poetry. And again, you can purchase both of the books through links in the chat. They'll take you to politicsandprose.com. And we will see you again next time on P&P Live. So long, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much, everybody. If there's a question you have, you can find us on Twitter. We can carry the conversation there if we didn't get to it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much for everyone being here and for hosting us, Politics and Prose.
Well,